Welcome everybody to today's Design Open Mic. Today we're really fortunate to have one of our board members, Scott Mattoon, here to talk a little bit about how the board works and who's on the board, what the setup is, how the board makes decisions, and then have an extended discussion with the staff in terms of the relationship between the board and the staff, and maybe a little bit on the chapter side too, and how we can advance that in the future. So.
All right. Thanks, Jason. So before we get into the actual presentation discussion, I brought you guys another jar of honey. Hopefully you know that I'm your official honey supplier here. This comes out of the backyard of my house in Glen Park, a neighborhood about 5 miles from here, 4 BART stops from here. I'd like to have you all over someday. Maybe you can see the beehives. And I'll just keep bringing these. This is a 12-ounce jar of primarily eucalyptus and ceanothus, and lots of other, sort of neighborhood garden honey, and it's raw, and it's full of pollen, so if you have allergies for local, like pollens, it should help with that. This topic today came up originally about 5 months ago at the November board meeting, where Kate said that there had been some discussion among the staff that they'd like to have a better connection with the board, and coincidentally, the board was thinking the same thing, that we probably had a better relationship, more contact with the staff. And so, through the course of a couple of meetings, one with the Technology and Communications Committee on the board, and then with the broader board at our last board meeting on April 21st, we actually took a resolution to address this, and we adopted 2 new decisions, and then wanted to bring a couple more decisions to you guys as well. So before I get into those, I'll just give a little background on what the board, is and how we're structured, who we are. Hopefully you've seen the list of, board of directors. This is it. It's also posted on the AfH website, and we're trying to actually bring a couple more board members on today. So the next time you see this list, hopefully it'll have a couple more names on it. We're shooting for about 12, and we have 11, counting Kate and Cameron, on the board today. You can see the office that certain board members hold, and then what committees are chaired by those board members, and then the committees that these board members are members of. Okay? So we'll go into this a little bit more detail in a second, but I wanted to point out the office roles here. So Matt Charney is a brand new chairperson for the board of directors. Our former chairperson, Deanna Jacobs, now listed as past chair there, starting a new career, had some time constraints, and the chairperson role is actually quite demanding. So Matt agreed to take it over, and we formally adopted him as chairperson at the last board meeting. Some of the other offices that are important: Paul Gaddney, treasurer. So he's the one that sort of brings to the board official resolutions about expenditures that are outside the budget, and approving the budget, and then any expenditures that might be involved specific to the board, which I'm not aware of any to date, but if that ever comes up, we'll be responsible for bringing that as well. I'm the secretary, so that involves bringing meetings to order and approving board minutes and making sure that things are communicated amongst the board in a formal process. Margaret Gold's vice chair, Cameron is president, and Kate is vice president. We might need a couple more officers as the board expands and the organization matures, but right now that's it. And then we'll get into the committee chairs in a second. Here's the kinds of things that the board does. This isn't an exhaustive or complete list by any stretch, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of things that we spend our time on. We meet quarterly. Every other meeting is in person, usually here, and we've actually had a couple meetings at the Gilligad event in New York, but I think that'll change this year. And then the alternating meetings, we meet by phone. It's typically a 2-hour meeting, and we always go over. There's a lot to discuss, but mostly we're just really interested in keeping up to date on things. And that's one of the things we kind of want to change and be actually more active and involved, as opposed to just sort of conveying status. We, of course, approve budgets for the year. And then, as I mentioned before, approving expenditures outside of the budget. So if something comes up, a surprise or a change in fundraising or whatever, then we can approve changes to the budget. We are involved in fundraising, but not nearly as much as we should be. The board members are not sort of professional fundraisers, although some people have sort of business development background. But we're not as involved in fundraising as we ought to be, and that was one of the sort of agreements. It wasn't a formal decision, but it was an agreement from the last board meeting that the board does need to get more involved. And one of the criteria we're looking for in bringing on new board members is the ability and willingness to go do more fundraising. Okay. And speaking of fundraising, each of the board members are expected to become community builders. It's basically a longer-term commitment, a minimum of 3 years, to help support the organization financially, as well as to get involved with field projects, going out and visiting projects. The board is involved in strategy and, of course, approving strategy. So that last strategy that was put together by the Presidio School of Management for 2009 through 2012 was approved by the board before it was formally adopted. And we'll go through that same process with the new one that you guys are going to be sort of delving into at the retreat in 2 weeks. Of course, we recruit new board members. That's an active process right now. We nominated a couple more people just this past week, or this past board meeting. We ensure that audits take place in a compliant way, and that our books are always, in accord with accounting principles. And then we appoint committees. At this point, I think we have 8 committees, and some of them were recently formed. And the things we are definitely not involved in is directing the work of the staff. And if you see, boards doing that, they're sort of breaking the model for what a board ought to be doing, and we certainly don't want to do that. And then we don't really get involved with assessing client needs. So it was a clear sort of line on the kinds of stuff that the board should be involved in. Those are some examples of that. So I'm on the Technology Communications Committee, and I chair that committee along with Cliff Curry and Margaret Stewart. And then our board liaisons are board staff liaisons are Dan and Anna. They both made tremendous contributions to this process. It's kind of hard to see, but just to give you an idea of the way the committees work, is we try to meet prior to the board meeting. Each of the committees try to meet prior to the board meeting, ideally like a month ahead of time. And then we do a formal report on what was discussed. That's this little sort of image over here on the left is what the report looks like. It's typically just a one-pager of what decisions were made and what follow-up items we agreed on. Okay. And so at the last Technology Communications Committee meeting, we decided that we wanted to adopt a couple of things for improving staff board communications and connecting the staff and the board better. Okay. Specifically, we resolved to share the board meeting minutes with the staff. And it's not exhaustive, it's really just the key points and decisions that were made and who was present and that sort of thing. So that ought to be one way to understand what's going on with the board a little bit better. Another decision that was made was to share the list of committee members, committee chairs, so that you know who to go to on specific issues related to those committee areas. And then finally, we wanted to establish some sort of direct connection with staff members and board members. And this is the one we actually wanted to come back to you on and see what's the best way to do this. One thing that was suggested by T. Luke, is T. Luke here?
No, he's traveling.
Oh, he's traveling, okay. Was potentially like a buddy system, where every board member has a buddy or a designated liaison within the staff, and that can be sort of a rotating thing because there's more staff than there are board members. And then, just make a point to connect like once a quarter, get to know each other, and make it sort of a informal connection. And any issues that come up that relate to the board, you can bring to them, and any issues that the board wants to bring to the staff or discuss between the two of you, make a connection for that. So we'll discuss that in a second, but I just kind of wanted to point a couple other things out about what the Technology Communications Committee does. We maintain a board website, so this is where we share all of our meeting minutes and other related documents, budgets, and that sort of stuff. Our calendar of events with board meetings and other board-related events. Then we look at other issues related to communications and technology. One of the things that we just sort of took up at the last committee meeting, and we didn't go too far in this, so we'll need to carry it forward, is how are we doing in the social networks, the big ones? Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. There's a huge number of followers and members in the related groups for Architecture for Humanity. And so one of the things that we want to take up as a Technology Communications Committee is, are we leveraging those programs or those social networks appropriately, sufficiently, and so forth. So this is where you can see committees get sort of involved in strategy, that you guys ought to feel free to contact committee chairs if you have issues or concerns or news that you want that committee to then bring to the board at the next board meeting. And again, we meet quarterly. Our next board meeting is July 21st, I think, 20th or 21st. And so if there are issues related to these committees, and there are a couple other committees that don't have chairs yet because they're like, you know, they're new, or the acting chair has stepped down. But these are the ones that have formal appointed committee chairs. And as this list changes, I'll make a point to make sure you get the current list. Right? So take note. Again, we'll share this list after the meeting as well. These are the people to contact related to those committees if there are concerns or issues you want to raise to the board.
Thank you very much for coming in and talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for your time.